add more celebration to my day, to my life.
I love this.
Right?
We're going to celebrate the Delmonico Way.
Exactly.
All right.
So here we go. So Max, this actually was an upgrade from our first dining experience. We've known each other like 3 or 4 years and have done your podcast, had great conversations, and first time we met to have something to eat, it included nuggets, garden catering, a bottle of champagne, and a park bench.
That's right.
Right? That's how we do it.
And for those that know garden catering, we had also the seasoned tater tots and all the dipping sauces.
Yes, and mac and cheese on a park bench.
Right.
So this was a lovely upgrade.
Which is not the Delmonico Way.
At all.
But it was because we celebrated with champagne.
Yes, that's
so we
how
brought
you do
that
it. So a
element
bottle
to the
of
park
booze
bench.
and some nuggets. So that's how you roll. You know, it's good to have layers, people. You got to be multiple different things, right? And so, Max, for this book, if somebody hasn't heard of it before or they're not familiar with it, how would you summarize this?
So the Delmonico Way is summarized really, I think, in the subtitle, which is Sublime Entertaining and Legendary Recipes from the Restaurant That Made New York. And that was the subtitle that Rizzoli had approached me with. And I was like, why is it so many words? They said, because it's all the algorithms. And the restaurant has so many algorithms in the history of Delmonico's. So the book is really a journey through old New York. When we go back to Delmonico's, we can go back to 1827 as first a pastry shop, and then as America's first fine dining restaurant in 1830s. So it's food history, it's also self-worth, it's also old Hollywood, from Gypsy Rose Lee to Ava Gabor to Marilyn Monroe to Rock Hudson. So there's so much that's into this book where my editor, Caitlin, said, if everything is special, then nothing's special. And so it was very difficult editing this book.
How do you kind of decide, like, what should go in, what shouldn't, because there is so
volumes.
much.
You decide by asking for a second book,
Oh.
right?
This is also a conversation about negotiating.
Which I'm working on now, which is the Delmonico Way cocktail book. So really, this book is a celebration. Breaking news here, and it's not Rosanna
You heard it first.
You heard it first at Orienta. But so really, the book is a celebration of, like I said, self-worth, food, family, friends, immigrants, my Tuscan family, and really just that notion that there's the spirit of validation. I see you, I hear you, you matter, and to set intentions while setting the table.
That's amazing.
So that's with some great photography and some wonderful. Yes, the recipes are great, and it talks about the food history of the recipes, but it's really about this book was a process.
I was going to say, now we talked about this for 3 or 4 years, but how did it, like, why now? Why? Because this is, as Max said, dates back years and years. So why now did this book come to fruition?
So this book is 15 years in the making.
15 years.
18 publishers turned me down. And when I was interviewing, 18, the lucky 18.
They didn't have the vision, they didn't see it.
Well, this is what I know for sure. Oprah said.
I was going to say, let's quote Oprah.
And it was in an interview that I did on my show called Max and Friends with Sherry Salata, who was Oprah's chief executive officer for 20-something years. And she wrote a book called The Beautiful No. And I was interviewing her on my show, and she was saying the beautiful no, and it kept like ringing in my ear. What does that mean? And what it meant to me and what it means to me is that all of those no's were beautiful. It was that rejection protection thing.
Right.
All of those publishing houses I wasn't supposed to be with. And so I was at Delmonico's in 2019. We spent my birthday there for one of them. And this time I was throwing a party for Whoopi Goldberg. She wrote a book. Big fan of Delmonico. She wrote a book called The Unqualified Hostess. I do it my way so you can do it yours. Published by Rizzoli. But to set the seed of Rizzoli, back, I don't even know how many years ago when I really started this, I was named one of Gotham Magazine's most eligible bachelors. And that meant one of two things. You were either a playboy or gay. And so my father was the playboy and I was the second of the two. And so they came to me and said, can we do a book called A Bachelor's Cookbook? So I started writing what was then called Romancing the Stove. And it was fun, it was funny. They were like, see, they're calling now. The agents want that book.
They're like, this will do well.
That will do well. And there was Oh Honey Chicken, Undo My Tie, funny stuff like that. But it wasn't my book. It wasn't meant to be. And so my mother said, Rizzoli is the only publisher that can publish your book. Talk about intentions.
Wow.
And so she set that scene for me.
Wow.
And after being rejected 18 times, I'm in Delmonico's, the building where my grandfather, my father, my Aunt Mary, my grandmother, all of my ancestors worked. So the energy, the fabric of the building has that Tucci DNA in it. And so when I'm in this basement of the restaurant, which is was the Mark Twain room, Whoopi's there, and Charles, who's like the head of Rizzoli, for those that know him, he's this tall man, a string bean, awesome guy. And he's observing me, and he goes, Max, why don't you have a book? I had my agent there, I had this one there. This is my 4th agent that I had, by the way. And I took a pause, and then I felt this ancestral push. And I said to him, I said, that's because you haven't published it yet. And I said, and I'll take a meeting with you. And he looked at me first, I think like,
what?
And I was like, remember, you're in my house.
Right.
And so he said, done, we'll have a meeting. And so I said, my agent is here, and let's make it work.
Right.
So the next week we had the meeting. My agent, by the way, did not show up, which is perfect.
So you were on to agent number 5 at that point.
That happened in the middle of the book. And so this is just the world. That's why I never give up. If this is your dream, dream bigger, because you can do it. This is a testament to that, to never giving up. But so he took the meeting, and he goes, here's why I think that people or publishers are turning down the book. And I'm paraphrasing. In the sense that you're not telling your story. You're giving the stories of your family, yes. But I want to see it from your eyes as growing up in this magical Delmonico's. And so I thought, oh, I get it. So I went home that night, and I started changing the manuscript. And it's like, you're a writer, so it's like the rollers in your hair, the big cups of coffee, and it's like, as you are on your IG account in the morning, still working, still doing, still thriving, still wanting. And the desire was rich. And so I went home that night, and I started rewriting the manuscript. Within 2 days, I rewrote it.
Wow.
And I turned it into him, and they gave me a book deal. And that was started November of 2019, and by January 2020, little did we know pandemic,
right.
the pause, which I call it, was going to happen. They gave me a book deal. So great. January 2020, my mother's like, break out the magnums. We had all of like these wonderful champagnes from Delmonico's. She was more excited than me. I don't get excited until the book is in my hand.
Right, like let me see it bound.
And so what happened was, in that celebration, now it's February, we're celebrating my birthday. We meet our friends Joanne, we're on Broadway, everything happens. This is February 2020. I get COVID. And it was fine. And then March comes, 2020, Delmonico's is shut down.
Yeah.
But here's what happened, the backstory. There were operating managers and owners who for 20 years, 30 years almost, were operating the restaurant. And I always say that unless you're linked up with that ancestral Tucci energy, that vibrational energy, you're not going to succeed. And so I just like sit back and watch the show, right? And what was happening was there was internal lawsuits. And this is all public information, so if you all want to get deeper in it, you can find it. It's a fascinating story. And if you know anyone who writes, who wants to do a series on it, we're available. But what happened was that there were these disputes, these lawsuits, these fights. They tried to drag my mother in. My mother was like, I'm going to the house in Italy. I want to be alone, right? With a pack of Cartier menthols. And so what happened was that the lawsuit happened. The partners were suing each other. The one group got the restaurant, and they weren't really pro Max. They didn't want the Tucci vibe in the restaurant like the team previous did.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Whoopi, I always speak about her often, but that's like that moment when we were in Delmonico's and she said, I feel your grandfather here. I was like, oh, you in danger, girl. Right? And so what happened was this team, they got the restaurant closes. The lease was to expire in 2022. And so it was like all of this time, the restaurant was closed.
Right.
But what it was giving me the opportunity for was to bring the Delmonico Way home.
Yeah.
So Charles, who's my publisher, was like, it couldn't have been a more perfect time that Delmonico's closed. And so here's the book.
And that's how I feel like it all works out.
It all works out.
Because I think timing has to play such a big part in things. And like you said, the right partner and the right moment. And there were so many amazing things brought to this book. And for people, I love the stories that, date years back. What would you say makes the restaurant so special and so unique? If there was a special sauce, what would it be?
Hello Dolly. You know, I mean, it was in Hello Dolly. Anytime there's something major in one's life, a celebratory event, I go to Delmonico's, and Frankie and Johnny, Elvis sings. We're no more hot dogs and sloppy joes. We're gonna dine on steak and wine at Delmonico's, right? Hello Dolly. Put on your Sunday clothes. We're gonna ride through town.
Right.
And so Delmonico's is when you want to celebrate.
Yes.
That's the word.
Wow.
And so
Perfect.
bringing that celebration home. And I think that's what I really wanted to share in the book as well with the recipes. Now keep in mind that during the pause, we had to shoot food.
Right. Right.
We had to find lobster. You know, we couldn't find lobster during this period of time. Even though, you know, and we shot the book in Florida, but everyone was like in zip suits and masked and this whole thing. But just to backtrack for a moment, the photographer in the book, I wanted to acknowledge her because the team was incredible. Her name is Jennifer Arce, and Jennifer is an amazing young woman from Colombia. She came to America with a dream. At the time, I didn't know her dream was to do a cookbook.
Wow.
And I had already hired someone else. And that person I heard say something in a meeting that, oh, this is Rizzoli's Wild Child or something. The book, not me. And so I said, in my mind, I said, when people show you who they are, believe them. So I said, this is not going to work for us. And I released her from the book. And then I started interviewing all these other people, and I found Jennifer on Instagram. And so I phoned her up. I had a meeting with her, and I said, why is it that you want to do, and I didn't tell her anything about Delmonico's. I said, why do you want to do a cookbook? So she said, it's my biggest dream to do a cookbook. So I stopped in that moment. I said, all right, if that's your biggest dream, then you need to dream bigger because you have the job. So why did I say that? Because if someone's dream is so passionate, they're going to put their all in it. And when you buy the book and a donation goes to Food Rescue, you'll understand the photography, what it means. And so this was during an interesting period of time where everything in the book, my Aunt Mary and my mother, Gina, saved everything from Delmonico's. The archives, the silk menus that date back to the 1800s from the royal family, all the dishes, the ginori, the baccarat, the cristofo. So to shoot this book, I had the archives that were saved for me. So everything in the book, every piece of ephemera, every dish, every fork, even the asparagus tongs were all used at Delmonico's. And I like to say, you know, for all you know, Marilyn Monroe could have been eating off of that dish, you know, the night before.
Absolutely.
So the book has that history.
You can feel that. What was your favorite thing to shoot? Your favorite recipe, I would say.
My favorite recipe was the lobster Wenberg, which is now known as lobster Newburg. I can tell you the story, but you'll buy the book, so I want you to read it. But that was, it's really, there's really a lot of components. Right now we're up for James Beard Award for history cookbook, also IACP awards. So we're up for 2 James Beard and 5 IACPs.
That's amazing.
Yes, thank you. And the book has already won a 2022 Muse Award for for design.
Amazing.
So real quick, in the interior of the book, those that have it, don't take it out, I'll show you. My book designer is named Roberto De Victi Compich. That's his real name. He was Jackie O's assistant back in the day. And all of this, I sent him files upon files for Delmonico Ephemera. These were all of the matchbooks. And so he put this together as what I've learned are the end pages. And I've also made this now into wallpaper. I've made it into silk lining for my jackets. So there's a lot. And even when we go to the ribbon in the book, my editor, Caitlin, she said, save everything because there's going to be something you want that they're not going to give you. And it was the ribbon. But I felt because the recipes, we go back and forth a lot and say, you know, to make the baked Alaska, you can use the banana ice cream for the inside. So the ribbon was the color of the tablecloths at the restaurant in Greenwich.
Wow.
Yeah. So a lot of intention went to the book.
See the behind the scenes that you wouldn't get, folks. That's amazing. This especially.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. As I was going through this, the recipes look amazing. The cocktails. Now, friends, the cocktails, that is where it's at. And I feel like for the past couple of years, we really kind of have gone into our kitchens and into our bar and kind of created things at home because we couldn't go someplace. And so we weren't interested anymore in like, oh, let me just pour a glass of wine. And a cocktail that feels fun, right? That feels fabulous. You know, when you have a girlfriend over and you make a Cosmo, we love a good Cosmo. When you have a special glass, I was reading about how, you know, that is such an important piece, like making sure that you have the right stemware and all of it goes together. And so for cocktails, what are your two favorite that are in here?
The Delmonico.
Obviously.
And also this absurd, I call it absurd because it is the Bloody Mary.
That looks massive. It looks like a meal, right?
Yeah. So, you know, and that's the Delmonico way, is always taking it to the next step further, which we use
look at that, y'all.
a lobster claw, which we use. I love you. Eve, if you all know Eve, you all know Eve. If you don't, you don't. But Eve and I have spent many dinners together. Eve was at Betteridge. So for those who love Betteridge, know Betteridge. But now where are you?
And let's don't worry about street club and
There you go.
Yes.
So
They're my favorite.
yeah. So the cocktail, which is in a baccarat glass, with the lobster claw, with the bacon, shrimp, and you have to make sure that everything is fresh. When you break your celery stick, you want to make sure there's a snap to it, right? And then we finish it off with caviar, because why not?
Because why not?
Right?
So that is celebrating. So that is her intention. So you can make that for me. That would be terrific.
That's breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
That's the whole shebang. I'll get a babysitter. One of the things I loved in this book was the mention of the power lunch. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, ladies, when was the last time you went on a power lunch?
So it's interesting. So I run a tequila soda company.
Okay.
And the power lunch is back. The power lunch is cool. And dating power lunches are what's hot and what's new. Like,
Good to know.
it's all back.
Amazing.
All back.
So
Well,
did you know?
Yes.
Hashtag did you know?
Did you know? I mean, again, all the behind the scenes.
So did you know that the first power lunch was at Delmonico's on April 20th, 1868? And it was the first time that women were allowed to dine unaccompanied by men. 1868. So this April, and it's an easy date to remember for those that understand 420. From the laugh, that means you do. But it's on 420. Awesome. So the first lunch is 420, 1868. Women were not allowed to dine without men. Now, in 1872, I don't know if you know, but there was a woman, Victoria Woodhull, who she was the first. She was the first presidential presidential candidate in 1872.
Right, Frederick Douglass was going to be her vice president
Right.
running.
And so she was at Delmonico's with her sister, not a man. And so the Delmonico brothers, someone was there, asked them to leave. And the sister had her chauffeur come in and dine with them so that they could stay there.
Isn't that amazing?
So, but what does that mean? It means that, yes, the first lunch was 1868, but it doesn't mean that it kept going, right? The suffrage and the struggle and the fighting still had to happen. In the book, when you read about Wall Street, women couldn't have their own credit card. Men had to co-sign for them up into the 1970s, right?
I mean, think about the 70s. That's just
It's like late 70s.
Late 70s. So when you read the pages of the book and you learn about these women, my Aunt Mary, we called her the Iron Fist with the lace glove, worked at the restaurant. Frank Smirlo, who's here, has been a friend of our family forever. He knew my Aunt Mary, and she was a force. And if you know Donatella Arpaia, her father, Lalo Arpaia, worked for the restaurant. And he said, your Aunt Mary had eyes in the back of her head. If there were 150 pork chops ordered and there were 100 ordered and 50 weren't counted for it, she was checking the pockets of everyone, right? But she did the finances.
Right.
So the women of Delmonico's, including my mother, you know, they shaped the restaurant. My father, my grandfather, yes, they were the energy, but it was the women behind the scenes. When my grandfather first opened the Speakeasy in 1926, during Prohibition, which is what really killed Delmonico's, my grandmother was bringing in all the alcohol through the side door of my father's pram, right?
I mean,
so, you know, they're Italian. They figured it out.
They figured out a way to do it. But I thought that was so special, and I think it's a really good reminder for all of us. Those power lunches, you know, that's different than your girlfriend catch-up lunch, right? We have those who talk about like, oh, let me tell you about my son being in lacrosse. Oh, yeah, and football practice. Oh, I don't know, you didn't make that in homework, did he try charge his iPad. There's those conversations, which are fun. Then we have, our girlfriends and what are you up to and what are you wearing and all that kind of stuff. But a power lunch is different. A power lunch, the way I would describe it, is women talking about ideas. It can be anything. It doesn't mean it has to be about Wall Street, but it can be about any idea you have. It could be about a book that you're writing. It could be about something that you're posting on Instagram, but it's about an idea. And I hope that we all bring those back. I love that Delmonico's had that because it's getting dressed up. It's making a list of things to talk about, like I do and I put here. It's bringing your A game. It doesn't mean it's a casual chit chat. You're allowed to have your ideas. You're allowed to bring them to the table, and you can make shit happen.
That's right.
Right? It's time to get excited again. It's time to get energized again and get motivated and celebrate. So I am all about. Don't get me started. I'll be here
I love
all day.
it.
But
I
we're
love
gonna
it.
bring those back.
Yep.
We're gonna head to Delmonico.
Cool. Bring it on. Awesome. So next up, we're talking about.
Next up, we're talking about the Greenwich location, which I thought was wild because you were mentioning, Max was mentioning before, the city we may remember got a little dicey.
Yeah.
And so you had to.
And we write about it. We write about it in the book. I write about Greenwich. I grew up here. So what I love about also is that the archives, we have pictures of the Greenwich restaurant, the Greenwich location, and growing up on page 177, how Delmonico's really started shaping Greenwich for fine dining.
Right.
The New York Times came, they did a wonderful review on the restaurant. But when my father died in 1987, and let's go back a moment in history, because to talk about the present, we always have to, talk about the past. And for those that know Ciro Macchioni from the Cirque, well, his first job was at Delmonico's. My grandfather, he was a Tuscan immigrant. My grandfather welcomed him, took him in, and said, you're going to be something major in this industry. And he went on to opening Le Cirque, right? Tony May, who had San Domenico, the Rainbow Room. He also had in Portchester, Osteria, Tony May's Osteria, where Pavarotti. Can you imagine that Tony May got Pavarotti to come to Portchester like 20 years ago? People couldn't believe it. But the point of this whole remembrance is that when my father died, my mother called Ciro Macchioni. My mother called Tony May and said, Mario put in millions of dollars into this restaurant. Will you take it over? And they both said, Greenwich is not the scene for fine dining. Right, Mom? When they wouldn't take over the restaurant in Greenwich, Tony May and Ciro Macchioni wouldn't take over the restaurant. Right. And especially one that wouldn't sleep with them. And so, right? Hello. And so, in retrospect of that notion, when you look at today at fine dining in Greenwich, Connecticut, my father saw that vision that Greenwich had. We did have all the way back up in Banksville, Cremaille, for those that know, right? But that was really the only one. If those of you who remember Greenwich, we had the chopping block, right? Do you remember? Who remembers the chopping block?
Oh,
okay. Do you remember?
Cheap and cheerful.
The best, right? With those big wicker chairs and the salad bar.
Say, let's go for CNC.
That's right.
Don't ever marry a Swede.
And then who remembers? Remember when we had That-A-Way Cafe, right? And we had That-A-Way, right? And then even more so, remember when we had the showboat with that big showboat. Who remembers the Showboat Hotel with that like half-sinking ship, right? Where it's like, if you were a mistress, you knew what room number you had. But so that was really Greenwich. That was Greenwich before Delmonico.
It was. And when you talk about Delmonico's, we talk about, the elegance, and that's what I think, is
Sophistication.
The sophistication. I think that's something, by a show of hands, we all miss, right? Because sometimes, maybe it's myself, how many times are we in leggings? Have I worn the same leggings for pickup? And then I might have worn them this morning before I finally put on a dress and put on some Spanx. So I was like, yes, haha, you dear old friend, right? And when I read this, it makes me so excited where it says, in those days, fine dining was elegant and glamour. Ladies dressed in couture wearing diamonds. And, it was just a very sophisticated environment. And I feel like all of us kind of miss that because we were comfortable for a long time, but now we're kind of like, get me back. Let me get a blowout. Let me get myself dressed up.
Yeah.
And it's a different vibe,
Well,
right?
what's interesting? When I did Tamron Hall's show, Tamron said, I miss the glamorous days, and I stopped her. and I'm gonna call out somebody in the room too. I said to Tamron, you bring the glamour.
Right.
So I say to my friend Andy, who's chit-chatting over there, I said, Andy, you bring glamour, Andy, right? So if we want glamour, we have to be the glamour that we want to bring. And so, you know, it really, in the book, it explains how to really just bring your best to every situation. You know, and to use what your ancestors gave you. And you know, you don't have to polish silver. I don't, which would drive my father crazy. I'm like, just use things, enjoy them. If they break, who cares? And so, you know, it's better to have them broken than never used.
Than never used
right?
at all.
And
Absolutely.
so, an inspiration, when you go home and you're creating your next dinner party or luncheon or whatever, use everything in the house. And I encourage you to break one so that's like when you get that first scratch on your car, you don't care
You're
anymore.
like, I'm over it.
Right?
It's okay.
So break something, the Greek way.
Yes, the Greek way.
Right?
Yes. What would you say is your takeaway that all of us in the room would have to make?
So the
If we could just
takeaway.
make one recipe.
Oh, the recipe.
Yes, one recipe. What would our?
Show the Bloody Mary cocktail.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the recipe that. Who has children in the room? For those of you who have children in the room, you know you can't pick a favorite even though you have a favorite, right, Mom? And so they're all a labor of love. But the recipes realize one thing: I'm not a chef, right?
Okay.
But I do have very powerful chef friends. Andrew Zimmern being one of them. And I phoned him. I said, I want something for the book, but I want something like that has meaning. And so he gave me his grandmother's salmon aspic. And so for those who are, you know, up with the trends in the IG, hashtag aspic. And ASPIC. Salmon aspic, you know, was something, or aspic in general, was something served often at Delmonico's. And so it's one of those retro recipes. Town&Country named the book one of the best books of the year. Avenue Magazine, they all were talking about the retro recipes. And so these recipes, they're not these complex recipes. Some of them are. The Tony May uovo raviolo with white truffles. It's like, if you can do that, tweet, email me, whatever, at Max Tucci, the picture. I will repost you because you're a genius. But there's simple stuff. Like Lena Horne loved cheese, you know, simple cheese wrapped in bacon. The one thing that I'll show you that's the showstopper, and since, you know, my father's energy is so present with his death day, he won my mother over with, Mom, what did Daddy run you over with? Win you over with, not run you over. He ran you over with a big Cadillac and threw you in the trunk and brought you to Greenwich.
Really nice was he had him pick up the delivery and brought me to Delmonico's, and he would have champagne and oysters and lobster and everything you can think of, just a whole platter full. And then the violins. And the gorgeous Tuscan Italian.
Right?
On top of that. But
Um,
it's a year to that.
Mom, can you come up here when you have, Mom, Gina, Mamma, vieni qua. Vieni qua, per favore. Fai piano, però vieni qua. Adesso. Andiamo e non ti rompami pale. But, yeah.
Italian growing up.
Yeah, so I grew up between Greenwich, New York, and Florence, Italy, and we still have our home there. And we've started the Delmonico Way Tuscan tours. So if you're interested in renting a villa in Florence, contact me. We're doing that. And next year we're doing the Delmonico Way at sea culinary cruises in Greece. But this here is the seafood tower that my father would serve for my mother. This is a very condensed version of it. It's 2 tiers. But when my mother was being courted at Delmonico's, it was like 4 or 5 tiers. And tons of caviar. Right, Mom? The caviar. How do you say no to a man who gives you caviar?
How can you say no to a man who gives you the villa in Firenze?
I wouldn't know. What I love when you're sharing all these stories of love and how you felt, what I loved in this book, it said Gina brought another level of style and fashion. And if a young couple were dining at the restaurant, she would send a bottle of champagne to celebrate their love.
That's right. Yes, you have to do that.
So I think that's so lovely, all the love that you were feeling and wanting to share that. And so just seeing a couple and being able to send over a bottle of champagne just to say, I celebrate you and I celebrate your love. And so we'll switch spots. You sit
No,
next
stay,
to
stay,
Mom.
stay, 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 stay. So, my mother, so that you know, I'm going to put her on the spot here, this was not rehearsed, but my mother was one of the first women in fashion she was the executive vice president of Maximilian Furs. That's how I got my name, Max. And in addition to that, my mother opened the Jaeger store on Madison Avenue. She also opened the Roberta Di Camerino store with Onassis in the Olympic Towers. What else? And her,
Incredible clients, Jackie O, Harry Grant.
tell us your Cary Grant story.
Oh, I mean,
He was making a coat for?
his mother and his wife to be, Diane. And he said to me, could you take your shoes off? And I'm going, oh God, I had a pedicure, thank God. and I looked at him, he said, well, my mom is very short, so I want to envision her in the coat. So I took this, and he held my hand. Didn't wash it for a month.
And what did he make for her?
He made a seal coat. We made a seal coat.
A seal coat.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what my mother brought to Delmonico's, which you'll learn in the book, is she brought basically fashion in the 70s to Delmonico's. So it was important for my mother to be there, to be in Greenwich as well, because the restaurant and our family was 70 years of operation. And so we had to constantly reinvent things. And so I thought it was very smart for my father to marry my mother so that he could bring that element of fashion and her Rolodex to the restaurant. They did a wonderful dinner. Roberta Di Camerino is not her real name. Her real name is?
Juliana
Juliana.
Di Camerino from Venice.
And so my mother brought her in and they threw a huge dinner gala for her. And so there was a lot of romance and a lot of intention and a lot of celebration at Delmonico's, and you brought a lot of it there.
Had a lot of designers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Bill Blass, right?
Jeffrey Bean.
Right?
I mean, I'm going back. All of you are too young.
Halston,
Halston. Oh, he was a dear friend.
Pierre Cardin, YSL. So,
Revillon Furs. I worked in Paris for 3 months a year. So it was very exciting, and I was very happy to help Delmonico's, to help my husband. And we had a wonderful time together.
Let's talk about Greenwich real quick. When you
okay.
first moved here,
Yes.
1970s, well, you know, you came on the weekends.
Yeah.
And Monero's was a big part of your growing up. Who remembers the garlic bread at Monero's? And who remembers that if there was a sign there that said if you give birth here, your child will eat here for free for the rest of their life, right?
I don't think anybody did.
No, well, Monero's, you know, but my mother recalls when she first used the last name Tucci in town, and what did they
that
say?
was at the hardware store on Greenwich Avenue. You probably don't remember it.
Still here.
So I don't know.
Before it was underground.
Yeah.
Yes, and I said, oh, I'm Mrs. Tucci, and the fellow next to me said, I wouldn't say it so loud. And I'm looking at him. He says, you know, they're all gardeners here.
The Italians.
Yeah, and I said, oh, really?
Right?
And it
So,
was a shock.
yeah.
I mean, a total shock. Can you imagine?
She said, call up the car, we're going back to Park Avenue. But, you know, so Greenwich, it's been a journey for Greenwich to observe the changes that Greenwich have made. But it's wonderful to be in a space like we're in now in Orienta, where we can celebrate everyone and there's no judgment, and it's a fun place, and it's a beautiful atmosphere, and the food is delicious. So, you know, Greenwich has come a long way. And for those that are operating restaurants, to be very candid, this is and I'm going to be blunt, this is a shitty industry. But if you put your heart in it, and if you put your love into it, this restaurant is a testament to that. And so really support local restaurants is really, yes, the pause happened, and yes, a lot of people, I was just told that they were supposed to open in March of 2020, and pandemic didn't allow that to happen for Orienta here. And so the struggles you had to open, and now you have this amazing cult following, which is how the papers, the glossy pages write about you. So come
Max,
and
that's
speak.
so kind of you to
course.
say. I just wanted to, one thing, when you said this is really kind of a shitty business. Personally, I was in the film business for over 30 years, and that's a tough business. And so, but for me, after I retired, this is a family-run operation. Our son and then daughter-in-law are our partners, my husband, Antoine, myself. For me, I find it just to be a wonderful industry. I get to meet lovely people such as yourselves. I love teamwork. I love efficiency. I love food. I love drink, and I love beauty. And I love to make people happy. So hello, check off every one of those boxes.
Hospitality.
I love it. I love
Well,
it.
I think, to back off of that, hospitality is a lot different than the restaurant industry, right?
Yes, yes.
Because the restaurant industry is cutthroat, but if the hospitality is present like yours is,
Yeah.
it really heightens the experience.
It really is. It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
And thank you all. Thank
Which
you
is
all.
what Greenwich Avenue used to be, a two-way street. And so, yeah, and then we're going to wrap up right now. We're done.
Yeah.
All right, so I want you all just to give some love right now to my dear friend, Christine Mulhearne. Are you doing a talk?
We have a couple of talks, and you can just follow along on Instagram, but it's not about me. I would like to celebrate Max, his mother, his family, and this book. Thank you all.
And to take that one step further, thank you. Sarah, when you first approached me, who knew that it was going to be this? I look forward to working with you. But I want to take this minute to my grandfather, and this is one thing that I would like for you all to take away with you. That's okay. I can speak over it. Is that my grandfather taught, and you'll read in the book, that all are welcome at my table. So what does that mean? That means welcoming all. Even if you haven't spoken to someone in a long time, you don't know how long they're going to be here for, welcome them back to your table. I'm doing talks now on the future of food and hospitality. And Jennifer English, who's a James Beard winner, Gracie Award winner, we speak often about the hospitality industry. And what everyone writes about is how to be a better host. So what I want for you all to take with you is not how to be a better host, but how to be the ultimate guest. And how to show up the next time, not only at a restaurant, but at your friend's house, at any event that you're doing, and be that ultimate guest. So whatever you're gonna bring to that table, know that you're welcome to Delmonico's, which is reopening in the fall of this year. So at the original location, 56 Beaver Street in New York.
Are you involved? What's your involvement?
So I love that question.
We're there. We all want to be invited.
Joy, you will be. And the question was, am I involved? And so there was a moment when your friend Oprah said it took a lot of prayer and meditation to answer a question, and it's taken a lot of time to fully answer that question. So the short answer is yes. We're working out the details now. But in the spirit of the Delmonico Way, however enriched I am or however in depth I work with them, my ancestors are always involved. So I look forward to the new journey of Delmonico's, to the book. It's for sale. There's a stack here. It would be my honor to sign them all to you so I don't have to put them back in the car, and so we can give money to Amazing Food Rescue US. And thank you all for being here, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.